afternoon. My name is Adrian, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Midwest and Great Plains Drought conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. John Ice with the National Weather Service, Climate Services Program Manager. You may now begin your conference.
Thank you, Adrian, and welcome everybody to today's Central Region Drought Outlook briefing. For today, our presenter will be Dr. Jim Angel. He's the Illinois State climatologist with the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. And we also have another speaker, once Jim is done, is Colleen Callahan from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we'd like to welcome her to our program. So at this point in time, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, today I'm going to talk about where we stand in terms of the drought. And so I'm here at the Illinois State Water Survey on the campus of the University of Illinois. And there's been several, a cast of characters that work together on this, certainly myself, Doug Cluck, you may know, and John Ice, and then a variety of folks that work in climate services throughout the Midwest here. Our next drought outlook is scheduled for February 21st, and so that'll be coming up here in another month. You also can access all of not only this one, but past webinars at the 2 web addresses there from the High Plains and Midwestern Regional Climate Centers. So those will be, I think I'll put those links back on at the very end here so you can catch up on that. But so if you've missed parts of today or if you see something interesting on there, you can check back on those sites. Probably in a couple of days we'll have all that posted. Well, today we're going to talk, or at least in my part of the talk, we'll look at current conditions, kind of put that in a historical context, also look at some impacts, some interesting things going on, and then the outlooks that just came out today. And then finally we'll open it up to questions and comments. Yeah, kind of recap of 2012, the National Climatic Data Center just released their report for 2012. And on the precipitation side, it's probably no surprise we had several states in the central part of the U.S. that had one of their driest years on record. In fact, both Wyoming and Nebraska had their driest year on record. And these state records go back to 1895. So we had a variety of states there that were not only very dry, but right up there in the top 10 list. So that's pretty noteworthy in that regard. And I think Wyoming and Nebraska get the prize there for being the driest. Look at the temperatures for 2012. It's probably no surprise that also is that we had many states in the nation were at or near their record high temperatures for 2012. In fact, if you look at the statewide, or I'm sorry, the U.S.-wide numbers, it was actually the warmest year on record. We came in at 55.3 degrees, which is 3.2 degrees above the century-long average there. So that makes it the warmest on record. And, you know, I'm not surprised because we had such widespread drought and some pretty extraordinary temperatures both in the spring and summertime. So that's pretty noteworthy there. If we move on to the last 30 days, so this is kind of the catch-up since the last drought update that happened in mid-December. If you look at the upper panel there, that's the precipitation total. So the areas in red are looking at numbers that are less than 2 inches, and in many cases less than 1 inch of actual precipitation. So that's rainfall and then the water equivalent of any snowfall. If you look to the right, or I'm sorry, to the east there are some areas that are green. So those had considerably more precipitation. We had a big-time precipitation event just the last weekend that dropped quite a bit of rain in parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. So that really changed the picture around. So if you look at the last 30 days in terms of the percent of normal, we still have some large areas of the central part of the U.S. that are much below normal. In fact, we have many areas there that are 25 to 75% of normal for the last 30 days. So those areas are certainly not having any kind of recovery process, but we have seen some additional recovery in that eastern part of the area. Like I said, from those rains, especially those rains of last weekend, really helped quite a bit. You had some other snow events that have helped as well. So just kind of the overall picture then, dry to the west and wet to the east is kind of the overall story there. The interesting thing, the last 30 days, is I use the national map here to kind of show there's really a sharp divide between the eastern and western half of the United States in terms of the experience on the temperatures. Pretty much right at the 100th meridian there, right at the Missouri-Kansas border, somewhere in that ballpark. Everything to the east has been above normal in the last 30 days by, in many cases, from 3 to even 6 degrees above normal. To the west there, we've actually been much colder than normal, and it gets really cold when you get up into the Rocky Mountain region. So a big contrast between east and west there in terms of the temperature experience of the last 30 days. Also may play out a little bit of snowfall, and we'll talk more about that in detail about that in a minute here. But this is the accumulated snowfall since October 1. So it's most of the snowfall season so far for the central part of the United States. And you can see a band of colors in the blues and purples there. There's a streak that goes from Arkansas through southern Missouri and southern Illinois, and then on up into Indiana and Ohio. That area has received quite a bit of snow from a snowstorm right after Christmas. That's really about the only noteworthy big storm that we've had in the central part of the U.S. We've had a few other events that we've gotten some snow, but that was probably the big snowstorm, so to speak. The area just to the west of that is actually kind of in what we might call a snow drought. Now we have a large area from Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, and on up into Michigan. They're much below normal snowfall for this time of year. So those areas it's been unusual. I'm here in Champaign, so I'm just near that red bullseye in northeastern Illinois there. We've had about 2 inches here. There's places in Chicago that have had an inch or less. So that's pretty noteworthy in that regard. It's just kind of odd to have lots of snow to the south and not much to the north in that regard. But if you move farther west, we have had some areas in the Montana and North Dakota have gotten some pretty good snows up there. It's within the normal range, kind of in many parts of the rest of the plain states and to the west there. But I would say that there is a large chunk that has been missing out on the snowfall. This is the current snow cover as of this morning here. So we still have some large areas that we were looking at the accumulated for the season. So this is what's happening right now. We have a lot of bare spots. You see a lot in Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa and Missouri and even points eastward there of not much snow on the ground. But we do have a little bit of snow content in the upper states there, the upper Midwest and upper Plain states, and also out in the Rocky Mountains. And probably this is great news if you don't like shoveling your driveway, but as far as things like the winter wheat crop, this could be troublesome because not only does snow provide moisture, but also provides protection against cold temperatures. So that's something to kind of think of as we move forward here into the next couple of months here. And also it also plays into the hydrologic cycle in the sense that if there's no snow there now, that means the spring melt will be diminished in some parts of the central U.S. So that's a story on the current snow cover. Here's some information from SnowTel sites in the western portion of the central region, and we've got kind of focus in on Colorado there. We've got many of the basins in that area are much below normal on their snowfall for this time of year. So the snow water equivalent, that's the important thing, is not how many inches of snow, but what water content is in that. So very important for Colorado and other parts of the Colorado Basin there. So we've got some areas of concern in Colorado and eastern Wyoming at this point in time. So that's another thing to keep a track on. I didn't have any slides on this, but I think the Missouri River Basin in general is okay in terms of the snowpack, mainly because of the snow farther north. So I think that's kind of helped out there. But the Colorado Basin and some of those rivers are way behind on snowfall for this time of year. Look at current soil moisture. This is a modeled soil moisture, so you always have to take these with a grain of salt, but they kind of give you the overall picture of what's going on. This one was last updated on January 12th, so some of that dryness you see in southeastern Missouri and southern Illinois and all that, that's pretty much gone away at this point. But we still have some large areas in Oklahoma, Kansas, and the High Plains states that are still, at 25 to 50 millimeters below normal for this time of year. So it's about 1 to 2 inches, so to speak, or maybe a little more than that. So we still have some areas there that have lingering long-term soil moisture problems at this point. And it's always tough in the Plains states especially to catch up on that soil moisture at this time of year. Look at stream flow. It looks very good in the eastern half of the central region. We've got lots of blues and greens there, so that's good news. That means you're at near normal or even above normal on stream flow thanks to the rains and snows of the last couple of months. Some reds and oranges in Missouri and Iowa and Kansas at this point in time. I always kind of think of stream flow as kind of the overall barometer of the hydrologic system because it kind of gives you a very quick summary of where we stand on soil moisture and the stream flows and even the groundwater level. So if any of those are really lagging behind, it really shows up in the stream flow. So it's good news in the eastern half of the region, but not so good news the further west you go. Look at the latest drought monitor map. This just came out this morning, so lots of reds in the central part of the U.S. there, pretty much from Texas all the way up to the Dakotas, and it's kind of the core region. Right now, I think it's about 70% of the U.S. is in some stage of either drought or abnormally dry conditions at this point in time. So there's a fair portion. It really hasn't changed too much since the last drought update. Some areas on the eastern edge there have gone away, but the core area has pretty much remained unchanged at this point. If you look at the area of hay production that's in drought at this point, and at this stage, about 61% of the pasture is in the drought area. Now, most of this is not being used at this time, but this is the time of year when the drought or when the pasture is trying to recover. So that's not good news as far as what might happen this coming spring. So not much recovery in some of those areas, especially in areas to the west of the Mississippi River. The same story for winter wheat. About 60% of the winter wheat crop is also in the drought area. And as we mentioned earlier, not only are we having troubles with drought, but lack of snow cover as well. So concerns with moisture and temperature in the coming weeks in that regard. Look at on another angle here, one of the other stories we've got is the Great Lakes region. We've got not much ice on the Great Lakes at this point in time. These are some satellite measurements of water temperatures, and so a lot of the water is open over the Great Lakes at this point in time. There are a few black dots there, black pixels that do indicate ice. And but for the most part, it's ice-free at this point, with temperatures hovering around the 40-degree range of many of the lakes there. So very mild. I don't have a normal map here, but normally for this time of year, we may not be fully ice covered, but it's probably getting close to the full extent of the ice season. So we're way behind in that regard. If you look at another product that Glural has that is kind of neat to look at if you ever have a chance to play with it. It's the Great Lakes Water Level Dashboard, and you can look at different lakes and look at different parameters here. So what I did was pull off the last 2 years of lake levels, and that's those little blue dots there. And then the lines at the very bottom of the graph there, the last set of lines there, are the record lows by month. And you can see the blue lines or blue dots are closely intersecting those record lows as we get in the last 2 or 3 months. So we've been running below normal for the last, or below average for the last couple of years, but it's really kind of crashed into that lower bounds just in the last couple of months there. That's probably a combination of not only some drought problems in the Midwest and upper Midwest, but also the warm temperatures in the wintertime, which and lack of ice cover, which enhances wintertime evaporation. We look at another subject, the Mississippi River. In recent, last couple of days here, it's actually gone up a little bit with some of the more recent rains, and so it's still very low. In fact, at the gauge at St. Louis, there it's still at minus 1.6 or thereabouts on the gauge there. So still very low levels, and they're expected to actually drop again over the next through the end of the month if we do not get any more precipitation, and we'll talk more about that in a second here. So continuing problems on the Mississippi. They've done some blasting and dredging, so I think they've been able to keep things going for now, but this forecast doesn't look too promising in that regard. Next, we'll look at the climate outlooks for not only the next couple of days, next 2 weeks, but also February and the 3-month time period. And these were just released this morning. If you look at the 6 to 10-day numbers here on the left, we've got the panel for temperature, on the right, precipitation. So we really got like we saw earlier with the last 30 days, we have this kind of east versus west here, only this time the fortunes are reversed, where it's the east that's going to be cold and the west is going to be warm. Some pretty extraordinarily warm temperatures over the western part of the central region over the next couple of days there, and then cold to the east. I would say in the shorter term, we do have expected some pretty cold temperatures over the kind of the central part of the Midwest there in the next couple of days, and some expected snowfall over the Great Lakes region as well. So here we've got going out a little bit farther here, so cold in the Great Lakes region, large area of very dry conditions, below normal precipitation in that 6 to 10-day period, pretty much across our region. A few spots of above normal up in Montana and North Dakota in the Great Lakes region, but for the most part, things are looking pretty dry in that 6 to 10-day period. If we look at the 8 to 14-day period, we see this large area of above normal temperatures to the south that kind of spills over into the central region of Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, and some of the Midwestern states. But also we have a large area of expected below normal temperatures in the northern part of the high plains there. Story for precipitation, dry to the west and wet to the east there, so it looks like some rain up the Ohio River Valley, but staying fairly dry out west. If we go on to the February time frame, we've got the increased chance of below normal temperatures across much of the upper Midwest and even into the Great Lakes region. And then also another area of increased chance of above normal temperatures that spills over into the Colorado and the corner of Kansas there. Precipitation-wise, increased chance of above normal precipitation in the northern plains and continued dryness in the southwestern United States. And then we go on to the February through April time frame, and we've got a large area of above normal temperatures in the southwest and continued increased chance of above or below normal temperatures up in the high plains area there, or the northern plain states. But a large part of the central region is actually in equal chances, so it's kind of what I call a neutral forecast on the temperature side. On the precipitation side, a very large area of wetter than average conditions expected in pretty much from the Dakotas all the way through the Great Lakes region and spilling on down into Illinois and Indiana. So that area has increased odds of above normal precipitation during that time period. So that's maybe good news for the Great Lakes and parts of the Mississippi River. If we look at the latest drought outlook, kind of based on what we were just looking at on the 1 month and 3 month forecast there, they show a large area of improved conditions pretty much in the midwestern part of the region. So the Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa and Illinois are showing some pretty nice improvements. You go westward, though, because they've got that large area of increased chance of below normal precipitation and so forth. That's really kind of caused any kind of recovery to pretty much stall out, at least in the next 3 months there. So drought expected to persist in places like Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, and then some improvement along the edges there. But I think probably the big changes will be in the eastern part of the region. So kind of in summary, we've got things are looking a little better in the eastern half of the Corn Belt thanks to some recent rains and snowfalls, but still waiting for the recovery in the Plains states. Those that just haven't seen that there yet. We do have a bit of a snow drought in some places in the Plains states and the Midwestern states at this point in time, but we're still halfway through the snowfall season, so we still have time to catch up in some regards. If we look at February on the outlooks, it's colder and wetter in the upper plains. That's been probably the bigger story. And in the 3-month outlooks, it's colder in the Dakotas and Montana and warmer in Colorado and Kansas. And then on the precipitation side, wetter in the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes region. So that's, like I said, good news probably for the lake levels and also the parts of the upper Mississippi River levels. Probably see some continued drought improvements in some of the Midwestern states, so kind of the heart of the Corn Belt there is going to continue to recover. But I think we're going to still see the problem area is going to be that Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado region that's expected, the drought is expected to persist in that area. So that's probably the areas that we're really going to have to watch out for. So here's some further information, and I'll turn it back over to John here, but here's just some contact information, some of the places that we looked at today, and also some of the players involved. So I think with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And now we'll move to Colleen Callahan from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Colleen, I will hand you the presentation, the presenter.
Okay, well, I thank you. My name is Colleen Callahan. Typically, my title would be the Illinois Director for USDA Rural Development. Today, I also serve a dual role in light of the drought. When the President said all hands on deck for drought as it relates to recovery and response, and preparedness, it was the first time that, I hope you're seeing on your screen the first slide, which is the...
No, we don't see it yet. So
oh, okay.
Did you accept the...
I did.
Oh, there you go. Now it's up.
Okay.
We got it. Thank you.
It is the first activation of the National Disaster Recovery Framework. Typically, when we have a disaster, FEMA is the lead agency, and this administration recognized that historically we could probably have improved our response, our reaction. And so at the end of last year, they approved this new framework called the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which calls for a federal disaster recovery coordinator. And as you can see from the screen, it also calls for more collaboration, coordination, and communication. So going forward, when there is a natural disaster, there will be lead agencies. Certainly FEMA will always be involved because that's what they do. They respond to emergencies. But in the case of drought, USDA is the lead agency. And so I was asked to go to D.C. and serve on a detail as the National Disaster Recovery Coordinator. That being said, we were challenged and charged to be collaborative and to be communicative and to collaborate across agency lines. And in so doing, we identified that we needed to know what was needed, what were the issues, what were the concerns. And so these states of Nebraska, Colorado, Arkansas, and Ohio were identified as areas that have been impacted and where input would certainly be valuable, not only to the federal government to learn how we may be able to react and respond, but also to those who live in those local areas. Who better knows what those concerns are than the people who live and work and do business. So there were meetings that were set up by local stakeholders. In some cases it was University Extension Services. It may have been in conjunction with land-grant universities. There may have been a private business that was also one of the partner coordinators. In each state, the location was suggested by those local stakeholders, the topics, the speakers, the presenters, and then the federal family attended as reference and resources, even including the tribal call that took place in November. And so I would ask, when was the last time any of us ever attended a meeting where the federal government was involved, where there was no one from the federal family that was listed on a program, that sat on the stage, or stood behind a podium? Yet that was exactly the scenario at each of these meetings. We were simply there as reference and resources, and we took notes, and we learned from those notes. And now what we're doing is evaluating what we learned. At the Nebraska meeting, when Secretary Vilsack said that resources are limited, so we will have to be smart, he was referring to this new framework and these meetings, because the purpose for our presence was to make sure that the full resources of the federal government are brought to bear as it relates to drought, from A to V, as I call it, from agriculture to Veterans Affairs, and that communication is not a barrier. There is no new money here. There is no additional money. So the Secretary is correct. We have to be smarter with what we have to work with. And so the issues that surfaced from these drought meetings were identified as these top listings: community planning, as you can see, economic issues and concerns, the federal government, what programs are available, where can they help, where are the impediments, fire management, forecasting, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in a moment, natural resources management, policy. Do we have programs that need to be adjusted or amended or made more flexible so that the federal family can be more responsive? What are the implications, the ramifications of drought as it relates to public health? Not only water quality or the water supply, but also the mental stress that comes along with dealing with drought. And then research and education, and of course, most recently, what has been brought to attention is transportation as it relates currently to transportation on the Mississippi River. Once those areas were identified, the Secretary went through that listing and established these priorities, which are water. Clearly, that is the core of the drought issue. What research needs to be done as it relates maybe to crop production, crops, utilization of water on those respective crops, research as it relates to water retention, and then regulations as it relates to water storage and reservoirs. And what about forecasting? Can it be more accurate? What kind of information is needed? And then policy. Some of the issues that came up that were discussed, in some cases they were statutory concerns and some regulatory concerns, and then that means that we get to policy discussions as well. The Secretary believes, as do I, that there are additional C's in addition to the collaboration and the cooperation and the communication, and that is that if we think creatively and comprehensively, there isn't a problem that we can't solve, and that's what we're working on right now. The challenge is that we're going to have to accept change. The federal family recognizing that some of the programs may need to be adjusted, and those who have been impacted by drought accepting that processes and procedures, decisions, inputs that are used to help make decisions may need to be adjusted as well. And I couldn't think of a better quote to relate that than the one by Churchill that says, "We must take change by the hand, for if we don't, it most assuredly will take us by the throat." And the graphic that I chose to use is this seedling. It could be a weed seedling, and I choose to think that it is, because what we're dealing with here as we try as a federal family to identify what programs are that exist, how we can make them more applicable and more quickly, is that we need to adapt, adopt, and accept change. And again, I couldn't think of anything that demonstrates that more visually year in and year out than a weed. Whether you're in production agriculture or not, no matter where you reside, if you look at a farm field, or you look at your yard, your lawn, or if you look at your driveway or a sidewalk, if there is a crack somewhere, a weed will figure out how to return, despite your best efforts to keep it from doing so. It adapts, it adopts, and it accepts change. And that's the challenge that we have before us. That being said, I believe if a weed can do it, so can we. So to this point, the action in action, as I've titled this slide, is that from listening at those drought outreach meetings, one of the things we heard was that as it relates to USDA programs, that there were programs that would provide funding or cost share for pond building, whether that water then was used for livestock or for irrigation. But the point was made that the funds that were available were only there to build new ponds, not to maintain an existing one. And at this juncture, those ponds were either already dry or extremely low because of the drought. So wouldn't this be the time to do that maintenance so that we make sure that we have that water retention and storage available? So are there funds, could there be funds to help me remove sediments? And consequently, from listening, starting next month, we'll initiate a pilot program monitored by and developed by NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, to remove sediments from ponds to help provide more water for livestock and irrigation, and that pilot will be taking place in Kansas and Colorado. We also learned that there was a need for improved forecasting, and we learned that some of the information that NOAA needed was already information and data that was being collected by USDA. So instead of duplicating, we signed an MOU with the Department of Commerce, where NOAA is located, to improve sharing of data and expertise, monitoring networks, and drought forecasting efforts. I've mentioned challenge as one of the C's several times, and one of the challenges, I believe, is reflected in this slide. And I'll leave it up for a while, because when we were at our final meeting in Ohio in very late November, from the federal family who was flying in from whatever agency or driving in from whatever location, it was commonly said, "Gee, it's so flat here. You can see forever." And we see all of these silos. And the thought occurred to me that these harvest stores are in fact that, and they are used to house feedstuffs. For those of us that are involved in agriculture are very familiar with that and for their purpose and how they are used. And so when what we house or store in these silos, or in this case these harvest stores, when what we put inside is needed by those who need it for their benefit and for their future health and sustainability, we activate the auger and we release what's inside these silos. And the corollary to that is that we have a lot of these silos in Washington, D.C. And the National Disaster Recovery Framework, utilizing it to respond to drought, has given us an opportunity to activate the auger, to release what is inside these silos as it relates to programs, so that each of us can learn what they are, to see how they can be adjusted and amended, and to see where they can be used together in synergy. So if a USDA program doesn't fit, isn't applicable as it relates to a small business in a rural community that's been impacted by the drought, maybe there's a program from SBA. And if USDA doesn't have one that can address the health of those who live and reside and do business in those communities, maybe there is something at HHS. And as it relates to EPA, EPA not only has programs that concern water quality, but also water quantity. And some may be surprised to learn that EPA has programs and has a program that addresses stream bank erosion and also the waterways as well. And so there are some synergies there between USDA and EPA. We're identifying those and beginning to have those kinds of conversations. So that's where we are right now. The National Disaster Recovery Framework calls for primary recovery support functions. And the agencies that are those primary recovery support functions for community planning and capacity building are FEMA. For economic, it's the Economic Development Administration in the Department of Commerce, EDA. Health and Human Services, HUD for housing. The infrastructure is the Army Corps, and for natural and cultural resources, the Department of the Interior. So these RSFs bring together the federal departments and the agencies and other supporting organizations, including those, but maybe not active in emergency response, to focus on recovery needs. We've met around a table very similar to this, all of these different agencies. One that is not included here but is part of this conversation is NASA. NASA, as you can imagine, does a great deal of weather research and analysis for their needs and the needs of others, and so that information is beginning to be shared as well. Going forward, we'll be meeting again these groups. I have asked that each agency and their point of contact identify areas in their respective programs that could become what we are referring to as deliverables. The two examples that I gave earlier regarding the ponds and the relationship with NOAA. What could each respective agency in the short term identify that we can begin to make available? And so we're working through the National Disaster Recovery Framework on two tracks simultaneously. A short term for those deliverables that I mentioned, and then longer term, we must develop what is called a recovery support strategy. So those convenings will continue. Next week we will meet again on Friday. I've asked for those reports in advance by next Wednesday. And then as we develop the recovery support strategy, the first draft of that is due on February 8th. Now, all of this in an effort to address, to react, respond, to mitigate, to address resiliency for drought from what we experienced in 2012. In 2013, just last week, we have announced 597 counties with disaster designations already this year. And so we can expect stakeholders to ask what the federal government is doing to help. And so in that vein, we are on these simultaneous tracks to identify both short and long-term responses. Now, on the slide that's showing now, again, I used some news articles that recently appeared. And the Mississippi River has become a most recent concern. The Army Corps has done an incredibly good job in being responsive to those concerns, and I know that there are some Army Corps representatives on the call, and I would certainly welcome their input when we open this up to the questions and answers. But between Mother Nature being a little more forgiving of late and the work that the Army Corps is doing in blasting the pinnacles, the rocks that surfaced as the water level continued to decline, the combination of the two has given us an opportunity to see those water level rise. so that the barges can move without the river closing. So there has been a great deal of collaboration and coordination and cooperation as well as communication. However, as it relates to what USDA may or may not be able to do, Congress did pass a one-year extension of the Farm Bill. But I would add another C, and that would be concerning, because it did not include funding for the disaster programs that had been part of the Farm Bill before. So as it relates to livestock producers and opportunities or options that may have existed prior to the expiration of the Farm Bill, those no longer exist. So we hope they will get something done soon to provide some certainty where it's needed. There was a Sandy supplemental, but not a drought supplemental. And so for further reference or information, here's the contact information. I also included a link, the portal for disaster assistance, which is a wealth of information as reference and resource. I would also say that as the federal family, in August, as quickly as August, the Executive Office of the President and the National Security Staff quickly pulled together what is referred to as a drought fact sheet from the various agencies. And so all of the agencies have identified what their programs are as it relates to drought, and we're using that as a template to identify how now those programs can be maybe, as I said earlier, amended or adjusted or used in synergy across federal family lines. So we believe that this effort has great potential and opportunity to bring not only emphasis to, in this instance, how government is working across agency lines as it relates to drought. It's also now being used in Sandy, and HUD is the lead agency there, much as USDA is the lead agency for drought. So if there are any questions later, I'd be glad to try and answer those.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. And at this point, Adrian, if you could open up the lines for questions.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, if you would like to ask a question, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from the line of Rick Kolsch. Your line is now open.
Thank you. And my question is for Colleen. Colleen, you and I met a little bit, got to know each other during your visit to Omaha for your workshop out here, your discussion session. At that workshop, we heard a lot of discussion from the livestock industry about the challenges they faced in terms of loss of equity and so forth. And in particular, we learned from the beef industry some of the risks that they were being placed at. And for the beef industry, that issue has only gotten considerably worse over the winter. In your discussions of your National Disaster Recovery Framework, has there been any discussion specific to the livestock or the beef industry and the roles the federal government might be able to play with in supporting them in the pretty severe situation they're facing?
Well, at the moment, as I mentioned, prior to the expiration of the Farm Bill, we did have programs for livestock that no longer exist with its expiration, and the extension did not include that. So as I mentioned earlier, those conversations, I assure you, continue, but without a Farm Bill to provide input and assurance at this point, there is nothing available at USDA that can address that issue that you're referencing. It certainly, as you say, it's continued. And you look at Jim's maps, and as we look at where drought continues and where it is showing a possibility of continuing, it's right in the heart of Nebraska and Colorado. So again, we are hopeful that we will have a farm bill that we can utilize as one of these tools that can help not only address this situation, but also in planning. One of our NOAA presenters, and it was at the Nebraska meeting, made comment that it is more economical to be prepared than it is to respond. And that comment resonated because that was brought up in reference in every one of the sessions that I attended in Omaha as we got to the breakout sessions as reference to going forward. Because while we certainly hope that drought will not impact 2/3 of the country as it did in 2012, the likelihood of there being a drought somewhere every year is very great. So we are hopeful that we can have this tool or tools that will be presented via a Food, Farms, and Jobs Act, as Secretary Vilsack refers to it, so that we can put that into the toolbox. And right now we don't have that. I would also add, not specifically to livestock or to beef cattle production, certainly dairy would be impacted equally. What makes it challenging and different to react and respond to this weather disaster is that it is the only one where Mother Nature can come back and undo what she did. When we have the tornadoes, when we have the floods, when we have hurricanes, whatever it may be, it typically is in a region, and then we are left to come in and respond and react and try to create resiliency. And that's the same thing that we're doing with drought, with the caveat or the asterisk that the drought severity isn't the same in each area. It's not localized. It sometimes is regionalized. This year it covered 2/3 of the United States, but we also have to be mindful that in our preparation, in our response, that if and when Mother Nature returns with moisture, that is a tool that none of us can replicate. But we also can't lose sight of the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes when we've had drought in the past and then we got rains later, we put these issues and concerns to the side. And then when they came again, we think, oh yeah, we should have planned for that. And so as we heard about the need for reservoirs and water storage, water planning, those are all things that do help us be prepared. And it is more economical, to quote NOAA, to be prepared than it is to respond. And so it's not only our response now, but it is also about our preparedness.
Okay.
Again, if you would like to ask a question, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad.
And just a reminder, if you do have a question, this would be a good time to do it, as we only have just a few minutes left in the call. So here's your chance.
Your next question comes from the line of Bill Schumacher. Your line is now open.
Hi, this is Bill Schumacher. I'm with the Intertribal Council on Utility Policy, and we're currently engaged with NOAA and NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System, conducting workshops on various reservations. My question is, has the National Disaster Recovery Framework reached out to the Department of Interior, and in particular the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to be part of that group?
I don't know if your question was, it sounded like it was addressed to someone representing NOAA, but I will reply representing the National Disaster Recovery Framework as the National Disaster Recovery Coordinator. And the short answer is yes. I don't know if you saw the slide that referenced that we also held a tribal call, and the call itself was very productive and was an example of responsiveness when a question came up about the Sac and Fox tribe and complications that they were having with wells on their tribe. And we were able to connect them with EPA, and they've been able to address some of those issues, and that was a consequence of that drought outreach meeting. As it relates to the Department of Interior, just last week in our meeting, David Baylor, who represents the Department of Interior, talked about programs that they have and issues that they are working on as it relates to our programs and getting them updated and helping them become more responsive so that we can prepare. When you talk about invasive species coming into an area, as an example, as he pointed out, those invasive species are preying on, if you will, utilizing the same water that is needed for a more productive purpose or need. And so if we can address those invasive species collectively or individually as governmental agencies or entities in our local, state, or region, then we have more water available for positive, productive needs. So it's a long answer to say yes, we are working across NOAA and with the Department of Interior as it relates to tribal needs.
There are no further questions at this time. I will turn the call back over to the presenters.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today, and we would wish you a good week, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.